All right, and we are officially live today for our political philosophy seminar. It's a particular day today for the Bay Area, for the US, and we are happy to make space for gathering together and discuss about philosophical politics. Well, political philosophy, philosophical politics, who knows? Today, we are very honored to have Emeritus Professor Hugh Miller. He's Emeritus Professor at Loyola University Chicago. His expertise is in phenomenology and critical theory. And today he's going to present a talk whose title is The Time of the End or The End of the Time. And thank you so much for accepted our invitation. We are the philosophy department at California State University's Bay. The floor is all yours. Thank you again.
Thank you very much, Susie, and thank you everyone who's here in the Zoom meeting and on YouTube. My name is Hugh Miller, and as Dr. Ferrero mentioned, my specialties were in phenomenology and critical theory. I was introduced actually to critical theory by a mutual friend and fellow scholar, Stefano Giacchetti, many years ago. And I've taken a great interest in Adorno since. But this paper will be on a different topic, and it will deal mainly, or in bulk, with the thinking of a German scholar who actually himself worked at the conjunction between phenomenology and critical theory, namely Gunther Anders. Whom most people don't know about, but who, as it turns out, is a very important figure and was very well connected, as I hope I will explain. Let me begin. First of all, this is a paper that deals with the problems of philosophy and of nuclear war. And let me begin by explaining some of my motivations for this project. Let me begin by sharing this. I'll talk about this in just a second. This is an intersection in London, England. Many years ago, actually, before I share that, let me begin by showing you a book that got me started in thinking about the problems of philosophy of nuclear war, which is a book that originally was published in 1982, at which time I read it, called The Fate of the Earth by Jonathan Schell. Jonathan Schell was a writer for the New Yorker magazine and published this book in that year, first after it appeared serialized in the New Yorker magazine. And it was an account, first of all, of what would happen in the case of an all-out global thermonuclear exchange between the United States and the then Soviet Union. And it was absolutely terrifying. It was just one of the most horrifying, riveting books I'd ever read. And in fact, the book itself was one of the impetuses behind the campaign for nuclear disarmament. Since that time, partly, I think, as a result of, result of a number of things we can talk about later. But the issue of nuclear war fell off of the radar, as it were. We'll talk a bit later about what Gunther Anders called atomische Blindheit, blindness to the atomic threat. But what revived my interest 3 years ago was the publication of this book by the American military journalist Annie Jacobsen. And if you take a look at the two books, you'll see that there's a difference in size between them. Jacobsen's background in military journalism allowed her to paint a much more comprehensive picture, one which was updated with much more science about exactly what would happen in the case of even a limited exchange of nuclear weapons. Since the time that Schell wrote his book, we've built down nuclear arsenals on both sides. But even with the arsenals that we now have, the results would be so catastrophic as virtually to guarantee the extinction of the entire human race, and possibly a degradation of the biosphere of the planet that would be similar to that of the Cambrian extinction, in which over 90% of known terrestrial and aquatic species on the planet died. An absolutely horrifying, horrifying scenario. And I thought to myself, there's there has got to be some way to come at this philosophically. This is simply, that this could exist and not be an object of thought at the very deepest level was something that bothered me immensely. So I began this project. One of the first things that I I encountered in my research was that there are very few people. There are very few um, um, publications which are dedicated to this kind of a subject. Um, and I wondered about that. Um, and I mentioned some of them in the presentation outline that I circulated to Dr. Ferrero's students. At least in the main currents of what might be called sort of modern liberal political theory, historical events are conceived of as occurring upon some kind of objectively given temporal continuum, extending from the arbitrarily remote past into the arbitrarily remote future. Now, the extent to which we can get evidential access to these events is maybe problematic, but the primary task of historical understanding is to establish what really happened, how it really was. So this picture of the temporal and historical givenness of historical events um, is largely something that's taken over from natural sciences understanding of natural phenomena, although that picture goes back all the way to the beginning of the universe to billions and billions of years in the future. And this makes sense. Human beings are part of nature, and we exist in the same basic way as other natural entities. So, of course, why shouldn't we understand historical events in the same way? And I'm going to take issue with this naturalistic model of history. In phenomenology and hermeneutics, we don't view historical events in quite the same way. In fact, I think that in phenomenology and in hermeneutics in particular, the argument is made that this naturalistic model not only misconceives historical events, but actually blinds us to a real understanding of historical events and our role in them. The picture I'm showing you on the screen shared is an intersection in London, England. As you can see, it's near Russell Square. This I took this image from Google Maps because there was a scientist named Leo Szilard, a Hungarian physicist and mathematician, who worked for a while with the Manhattan Project before eventually abandoning it because he thought it was immoral. And this, in his autobiography, he describes this intersection and a particular date, the 12th of September, 1933. He said he was walking across this intersection, and when he stepped off of the curb, he suddenly had an idea. The idea was that it had recently been discovered that you could fission certain radioactive elements by bombarding them with neutrons. And the idea came to him that if you could set up a situation where you could bombard a sufficiently high concentration of atomic nuclei with neutrons, that a kind of nuclear chain reaction could take place. That the neutrons bombarded the atoms of the radioactive material. They in turn would release more neutrons, which would react with more nuclei, which would produce a runaway chain reaction, which would liberate huge amounts of energy, which could conceivably be used to make bombs. And by the time he stepped to the other side of the street, the idea of an atomic bomb had already formed in his mind. So this instant, I think, and this spot that you are looking at marks the beginning of the nuclear age. And that is the age in which Gunther Anders, to which Gunther Anders wants to draw our attention, that I want to draw our attention. Now, I discovered Anders partly because a colleague referred me to him. This is how obscure Anders has been until recently. But luckily, Anders's great book, The Obsolescence of the Human, has now just arrived in my mail as of 5 days ago. It's translated by Christopher John Mueller, who works in Sydney, Australia. And he has done a great service to the philosophical community by translating volume one. Volume two is forthcoming. But in the second part of this book is one of Anders's critical treatises atomic, on the atomic age. So Anders is now beginning to receive the kind of attention that I think that he deserves. What is really striking about Anders is, well, first of all, let me say something about the man. Let me find my little document here. Here we go. Yes. He was a student of Erwin Panofsky, the great art historian. He was also a student of Ernst Cassirer, the philosopher. Edmund Husserl was his Doktorvater. He was his dissertation director. He wrote a dissertation on philosophical anthropology under Husserl. He was a student of Heidegger's, also at the same university, Freiburg. He was a collaborator with Immanuel Levinas, with Max Horkheimer, with Theodor Adorno, and he was a friend of the philosopher and scholar of Gnosticism Hans Jonas, and of Bertolt Brecht, the great playwright. He was the housemate in Los Angeles in exile of Herbert Marcuse. He was the first cousin of Walter Benjamin, the philosopher and literary scholar, and he was for a number of years the spouse of Hannah Arendt. So this is a man who is connected and plugged in everywhere. During the war, he emigrated to the United States and lived in Los Angeles, which is where he had a lot of dealings with Adorno and Horkheimer and other German exiles. But on August the 6th, 1945, he woke to the news that Hiroshima had been atomic bombed. And he said it literally paralyzed him. He didn't know what to do. He couldn't go forward with any thinking for the longest time. I sent around a set of quotes, by the way, which, hang on a second. Let me see if I can find said set of quotes.
They are in the chat if you want, for the people.
Here we go. I will share it. Here. These are some quotes. Let me point out two of them. One is by James Chadwick, a physicist and discoverer of the neutron, and another is by Richard Feynman, also a physicist and discovery of beta decay. For both of which discoveries, they respectively won the Nobel Prize in Physics. He says, "I remember the spring of 1941 to this day," Chadwick says. "I realized then that a nuclear bomb was not only possible, it was inevitable. Sooner or later, these ideas could not be peculiar to us. Everybody would think about them before long, and some country would put them into action. I had many sleepless nights, but I did realize how very, very serious it could be. And I had then to start taking sleeping pills. It was the only remedy. I've never stopped since then. It's 28 years, and I don't think I've missed a single night in all those 28 years." And then Feynman, who describes the Trinity test and his reaction to it, and about how shortly after that he went off to Cornell to teach, and he was in New York, and he looked out at the buildings, and he couldn't help but think, what would happen if an atom bomb struck Manhattan? And he looked at people building things, and he said, why are they building things? They're crazy. They just don't understand. They don't understand. Why are they making new things? It's so useless. But he goes on to say, fortunately, it's been useless for almost 40 years now, hasn't it? Over 70 in our case. So we've been wrong about it being useless making bridges, and I'm glad those other people had the sense to go ahead. Look at the difference between these two. Feynman, as it were, got over it, which Anders will insist you shouldn't. Chadwick never did. And I think Anders would insist that Chadwick's is the correct response. Now, after a while, Anders began to write and began to realize that his philosophical mission, therefore, going forward in life, would be to think the problem of what the meaning of the atom bomb and of atomic warfare would be, for the present age, and indeed for philosophy generally. By the way, I should point out two more things before I get into talking about Anders. Um, and um, I want to mention to you two numbers. Number one is 1 hour and 32 minutes. And the other is 85 seconds to midnight. The first number, 1 hour and 32 minutes, is according to Annie Jacobson's book, How Long a Nuclear War Would Take to Destroy the Planet and Virtually All Human Life on It. 1 hour and 32 minutes. It is common to think about climate change and other such catastrophes facing us. But those will take a long time. Those will take decades, centuries. This will take 1 hour and 32 minutes from start to finish in Jacobson's scenario. The other one, which is 85 seconds to midnight, is the let me share that for you. "85 seconds to midnight" is what the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists 3 days ago set its doomsday clock to. This is the closest to doomsday that the atomic clock has ever been set. The bulletin started 48 years ago as a way of keeping atomic scientists up to date on political and economic issues and moral issues involving nuclear weapons. And its initial remit was atomic weapons and atomic warfare, but it's since expanded to concerns like global warming, biological and chemical warfare, AI most recently. But one of the things which has led them to move the clock even closer to midnight than ever before is the increased threat of nuclear weapons, thanks to the regimes that are now in power around the world, including, I regret to say, in the United States. Now, this adds a very great deal of urgency. This is an urgency which has never ceased to be important ever since Anders began to think about it. And I want to begin by going over some of the things which I circulated for you in the Anders clip, which I sent around. I will simply use my own document here as a guide, because I don't want to cover all of the Anders document. I certainly hope that you will read the Anders document in its entirety. It's not very long. It's a set of just under 24 theses, in which he tried to state very compactly his thinking for students around 1946. And I think they're extremely useful and very clear and very kind of punchy. Now, I want to pay attention in particular to his notion of the age in which we live. For Anders, thanks to the atomic bomb, we entered a new kind of world condition on August 6th, 1945. Humanity became, in a negative sense, omnipotent. Omnipotent in the sense that we can now make any place at any time on the surface of the planet a Hiroshima, or something much bigger than a Hiroshima, because now we have very large hydrogen bombs. At the same time, he says we become totally impotent, because this power consists in the ability to annihilate ourselves. We can be wiped out by this omnipotent power at any time. This means, he says, that the world has entered a new age as of August the 6th, 1945, what he calls the last age, the age of respite, the time of the end. as opposed to the end of time, which would be the moment of the hour and 32 minutes of nuclear annihilation. This time, the time of the end, the last age, can never be allowed to end, except, of course, by nuclear Armageddon or by some other similarly apocalyptic event. And it can never end for a couple of reasons. First of all, once the idea of nuclear fission and fusion have been discovered, the genie can't be put back in the bottle. We can't undo the knowledge of it. And for Anders, building on someone like Heidegger, what that means is that our very mode of being in the world, to use a Heideggerian expression, has changed. No longer are humans being towards death or being towards my own death, but we are in the mode of existing called not quite yet being not existing. So this entails a kind of radical reformulation of our basic moral question. So no longer is it a case of how we should live, he says, but will we live, right? Will we continue to exist, or will we end it all? And the answer to this question, he says, is straightforward. Quote, although at any moment the time of the end could turn into the end of time, we must do everything in our power to make the end time endless. And he says that since we know that the end of time is an immediate possibility, we are, he says, apocalyptics. That since we fight relentlessly against this possibility being realized, we are what has never existed before, anti-apocalyptics. There have been plenty of apocalyptics before. In the pre-modern age, most people thought that the world would end, right? They thought that God would bring it to an end, or that some natural cyclical catastrophe, as in the ancient Greek writings, would end civilization. That the planet was doomed to cycles of birth and death. But in recent periods, when we've dreamed up the idea of progress, we've tended to think that this is not something that's possible at all. But it very much is possible thanks to nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons, he says, are not parts of a political situation. Rather, politics exists within a nuclear situation. And since the political question confronts the issue of the enemy of the polis, we have to say that the enemy is no longer other policies, not other states, but the nuclear situation as such. The nuclear situation is the enemy of people, and it's the enemy of all people. So we must all ally ourselves together to defeat it. In other words, peace solidarity has to be something universal, and no one can be excluded. You can't have some rogue nation out here, be it North Korea or whoever, building nuclear weapons and simply being allowed to do whatever it wants. It's like that old anecdote from the Talmud. People in a lifeboat, and someone starts to bore through their seat in the bottom of the lifeboat, and everybody says, stop, you can't do that. And then the person says, it's my seat, I can do what I want. No, you can't. You will destroy the whole lifeboat. National boundaries, he says, and distances are abolished because nuclear fallout clouds don't know such limits. Blast radii don't know such limits. So our horizon of moral responsibility widens until it equals that within which we can destroy and be destroyed by everybody. It becomes global. And also the horizon of time is globalized. Nuclear blackmail threatens the existence of future generations. That's one of the main arguments, by the way, in Jonathan Schell's book against nuclear weapons. They doom future generations to never coming into existence. But it also, says Anders, and Schell doesn't go here, it threatens the past. It threatens our ancestors. Our ancestors, having died once, will now die a second time because we who keep alive their memory will be extinguished. Again, importantly, we're suffering what he calls a Promethean lag. This is a tremendous concept. We're unable to imagine the immensity of such a catastrophe as a global nuclear holocaust. It's not like trying to imagine someone dying or a group of people dying, or even an awful genocide like the Rohingya or the Palestinians. This is something that is so vast that it encompasses the absolutely everything. Um, it's like trying to imagine the obliteration of the whole world, all of us in it, all of civilization, everything we've built, and to think that we maintain a system of weaponry and communications, command and control, which holds all of this weaponry in instantaneous, second by second hair trigger readiness, is simply mind-boggling. And yet we've built it, and we can't imagine it, even though we've done it. So, which that means, he says, is we've become what he calls inverted utopians. In previous generations, utopians were people who couldn't produce what they imagined, but we're inverted utopians. We can't imagine what we've produced, and which is there as a fact in front of us. But we have to try to force ourselves to understand this. We have to frighten ourselves, if necessary, into understanding that this is what we've done and this is what stands in readiness. He likes to take over the commandment from the New Testament: frighten thy neighbor as thyself. So let me stop there for a second with on this.
No.
And
sure.
let me take up my own concerns. My concern has to do with thinking about time and history in all of this. I mentioned at the beginning of the talk that I'm concerned with the issue of time and history. When we normally consider historical events like the Manhattan Project, the construction of the atomic bomb, the project to construct hydrogen bombs, the building of the C3 systems in the United States and in Russia and in various other countries for nuclear deterrence and war. We tend to think in terms of this objective spread of history, where these are simply events along some sort of pre-given temporal continuum. But a French philosopher named Quentin Meillassoux, a number of years ago, published a book called After Finitude. And in that book, Meillassoux raises a paradox. Most post-Kantian, that is to say, post-critical philosophies, so that they don't fall back into a kind of dogmatic realism about things, maintain that the critical standpoint that you have to maintain is that thinking and being are correlated to one another. There is no thinking without being. There is no being without thinking. We cannot think the one apart from the other. So to ask the question of what is a thing in itself, like Kant, is something very difficult to do for post-Kantian philosophers, particularly for someone in the phenomenological tradition. You can have access only to such objects as give themselves in some sort of intuition. So much intuition, so much knowledge, to use the Husserlian first principle. Now, the problem, says Meillassoux, is simply this. Think back to the old problem of primary and secondary qualities in someone like Locke, right? Secondary qualities are qualities that appear to me, the redness of a red object, the warmth of a warm object. But primary qualities are said to be mathematizable properties present in the objects themselves apart from my sensibility. The fact that a pen is about 22 centimeters long and about 1.5 centimeters in diameter. These are properties which are primary qualities which are said to subsist in the pen, independent of whether I happen to be intuiting that pen or not. And Meillassoux says that we can also ask questions about statements about what happened before, before the correlation ever appeared between thinking and being, before they were thinking beings. What about the formation of the Milky Way galaxy? What about the formation, the accretion of planet Earth? What about fossils that we find in the ground of dinosaurs and of stromata and of ferns and of fossil trees, things like that, which point to a time before the emergence of some sort of sentient being? What sense can we make of those from inside the correlation? And Meillassoux wants to push this question very hard because it suggests that there's a real limitation to correlationism, right? And in fact, it's a correlation. It's a problem which he wants to do to try to transcend correlationism in favor of some kind of speculative approach to the real world. Now, my interest here is not the same as his. I'm not interested in acquiring access to what he calls ancestrality, that is to say, to what precedes the correlation. I'm interested, the problem of the end of time is precisely giving me some sort of access to what comes after the end of the correlation. That is to say, what comes after us pushing the button. Right? Now there are certain objects, what he calls of the ancestral, what Meillassoux calls of the ancestral archaefossils, things which indicate to us that there was such a thing as a time before the correlation. And there are such fossils, such teloi fossils, if you will, of a future beyond things like the Hiroshima dome, the peace dome of Hiroshima, or the fused glass at ground zero of the Trinity test, right? These are indications in the material world of a future that would somehow post-date the correlation. And I speculatively want to use those as a way of trying to think about something that Anders points out. One other quotation that I will let you look up in the documents, which is that the future, that of the future, and this is something that Anders pushes in the obsolescence of the human. The future used to be something which came to us, happened to us, something out of our control, right? If you wanted to see what would happen next week, you waited. Next week would inevitably arrive, right? So, and again, there's been a transformation from antiquity to the modern period in its idea of progress. But there's a difference now in what he calls the time of the end. The opening of givenness, that is to say, what Meillassoux points to as the beginning, is something that happened to us. It gave us to ourselves, and it gave the world to us as sentient beings. But the closure is something that we will carry out ourselves, or might carry out ourselves. The future no longer comes, Anders writes in The Obsolescence. We no longer see it as coming. We make it. And we make it in such a way that it contains its own alternative, the possibility of its end, possible futurelessness. So again, something has changed about our constitutive being in the world. What Heidegger would have called the existentiala, the very potentialities for being that Dasein has. Something has changed. The future itself is different. The future is not something that befalls us or happens to us. It is something that we can carry out in such a way as either to prolong it indefinitely or to stop it, to end it. And that's something that has never happened before. Again, in ancient apocalyptic scenarios, God would end the world, right? God would, the last judgment on the front wall of the Sistine Chapel, right? Um, the trumpet shall sound and the dead shall be raised and everything like that, right? Or in antiquity, the cyclical notions of natural history. But this is something we do. Nothing outside of us does this. A God does not do this. Nature does not do this to us. We can do it ourselves at any moment in a tad over an hour and a half. We can end time. Now, this suggests to me that, as I mentioned in the handout, that there is, in fact, an ethical direction to temporality that has been made manifest to us by the beginning of this epoch that we are dwelling in. That we have, as he says, a new categorical imperative, an anti-apocalyptic categorical imperative, which is incumbent upon us now. We must do everything in our power to make the end time endless. And I think one of the reasons that Anders chooses this kind of deontological language, this kind of duty-based ethic language, is precisely the stringency of deontology. Deontological ethical principles have, as Kant says, the status of commands. They do not admit of exceptions. They do not admit of one's happiness or unhappiness. They do not admit of qualification by circumstance or by whatever. They command you categorically to do something. They are not hypothetical imperatives. And I think that this is the kind of imperative that we have to take seriously in the present age that we find ourselves in. Anyway, this is the beginning of a sketch of a much larger project that I'm working out. I want to try to extend this in a number of ways. I have an argument with, for instance, utilitarianism, in particularly the long-termist utilitarians, that I really want to use this against them with. And it's amazing that the long-termists don't really talk about these sorts of particular issues, specifically this one. At any rate, I see that I am coming up on 40 minutes past the hour. You all have the handout. You all have some of the other documents that I've shared. I would simply close with one of the documents which I've shared, which is the collection of quotes. Here, I will share it again. The quote coming from A.J.P. Taylor, the historian, which is the second quote. If you were to ask me, really seriously, what future is there for mankind? I would be tempted to answer, the future likely for mankind, I don't say certain, is that the whole of mankind will be subjected to nuclear war and to other forms of warfare, even more destructive, and that the vast majority of the population everywhere in the world will be destroyed, and then the few remaining, impoverished, crippled, in a poisoned atmosphere, will have to start rather as Noah did after the flood. This is a depressing thing, a terrifying, terrible thing to end on. But I think terror is what's called for. Anders is right. Frighten thy neighbor as thyself. We have been blind to the atomic threat. We have deliberately blinkered ourselves to it. The reasons why, partly because of the myth of progress. Partly, he says in the obsolescence book, he says, because we have imbibed this notion that we should not worry about things which we cannot control. You may have noticed that neo-Stoicism has become quite popular recently. This is a grotesque mistake, according to Anders, because precisely we do control this. We can make disarmament happen, but it will require the unblinking resolve of all of us to make it happen and to keep it from re-happening. This is the thing. We have to make this end time endless, which means that vigilance, eternal vigilance, will have to be prosecuted from this moment forth. So I will leave you with that somewhat dispiriting, but on the other hand, quite properly frightening quote.
Thank you, Professor Miller. I mean, I'm taking it and digesting it. Oh, and we cannot look elsewhere. It's I think yeah, you are the perfect messenger of Anders' thinking, because you managed to bring together levity and death at the same time. So
He had a great sense of
thank you.
humor. He had a great sense of humor. He did.
So I think
Which is odd considering what he was facing. He used to say, uh, hang on a second. Um, I have a little quote of his. Um, he says, quote, "I have not wrongly been portrayed as someone who for decades has been engaged in the not very cheery pursuit of warning about the impending self-destruction of humanity," unquote.
yeah.
He
He
did have his
fortunately had what it took. Because one question I had, maybe I start with the questions, with the Q&A. I know that immediately it should be before me, Muhammad, and then Kinsey, and then whoever wants to join, also on YouTube. One quick question is, what's the toll? Hi, Chris. What's the toll on you doing and Anders? I mean, doing my own research takes a certain toll, and
it does, and I won't kid you. It's difficult reading this material. I will tell you that when I originally wrote the first draft of this for a presentation last year, I went and checked the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, and at that time they had the previous year updated the clock to 58 seconds to midnight, or 58 seconds to midnight. 3 days ago, I went back to make sure that it was still that, and they changed it again. And I couldn't sleep that night. I was just
Sorry.
terrified. I mean, these are people who are experts. They know what they're doing. These are not people who just pull numbers out of a hat. They've got very good reasons for what they're saying. And and I think that one of the things that enables me to overcome the just depressing and frightening and horrifying prospect that this topic elicits, the speed of it. I mean, the absolute completeness of it. I mean, one of the most graphic scenes in Jacobson's book is a description of what would happen when the first bomb explodes on the Pentagon in Washington, D.C. It isn't just that the Pentagon will be incinerated, it's that the National Gallery, everything in Washington would be pulverized to dust and ashes. And then the same would be repeated in London, Paris, Rome, Berlin, Prague, um, Lagos,
Alexandria.
Auckland, Sydney, Melbourne, everything would be destroyed. There's a wonderful television series that was made back in the early 80s. It's available on YouTube by the Canadian military historian Gwyn Dyer, Dyer. It's simply called War. 6 or 7 episodes. And Dyer used to teach at Sandhurst and at the Royal Military College in Kingston in Canada. He knows his stuff. And this television series it's available on YouTube in, I think, 720 pixel resolution. So you can view it for free. But it's terrifying. And the last episode is Notes on Nuclear War. And that's where I found the quote from A.J.P. Taylor, who's interviewed. That's where I found a whole bunch of other things. But one of the things that Dyer remarks is that in a nuclear war, in regular war, people die. In fact, thousands of people die, hundreds of thousands of people die, right? But civilization goes on. In a nuclear war, everything that gives us meaning, all of human civilization, would be wiped out to the last particle. And how could we go on? How could one go on in the face of that? That's really, to me, the most terrifying thing. And in terms of, in terms of catastrophes, if there were, climate breakdown, things would get bad in a hurry, no question. But so long as there weren't nuclear exchanges, we would probably be able to keep a vestigial population of the human race going. We could remember the ancestral past. We could plan for some kind of reduced future, some kind of sustainable future for the surviving members of the human race, not in a nuclear war. Boom, all gone, everything gone. Not only the future destroyed, the past as well. That also terrified me. The idea, it suddenly got to me that, yeah, not only would the future generations be wiped out, so would the past generations. They would die a second death. So I will not kid you. That's terrifying and frightening to think about. But on the other hand, the his, I mean, in a sense, Andres gives me a lot of strength. His absolute forceful deontological commandment. This is like hearing Kant tell you, you know, what the categorical imperative is. And that language deeply appeals to me because I'm basically a deontologist in my ethics. A Levinasian deontologist, but I am a deontologist. So hearing that kind of language again is incredibly powerfully motivating. I once studied with Emil Fackenheim at Toronto, and Fackenheim went back to Germany after the war, and he interviewed a former professor of his who had survived the death camps, who'd been imprisoned for criticizing the Nazis. And he asked him, he said, how did you manage to do it? And his professor said, if it hadn't been for Kant, I couldn't have gone on.
Wow.
So hearing those kind of commandments, right, those kinds of imperatives is something that gives me a lot of fortitude. I've set myself some deadlines for completion of the draft, get everything out, because this is something that needs to get published and needs to get published. Chop, chop. Yes, exactly. Pronto. Prontis.
Grazie, Hugh. Mohammed Tala, I hope I'm pronouncing your name well. It's your question.
Muhammad, you need to turn off your mute.
That's a good reminder. You will never know.
You have to unmute yourself, Muhammad.
We can start with Kinsey and see if Mohammed will.
Okay. With Kinsey, to clarify, are you claiming that time exists only when humanity is alive to observe it? In a certain sense, yes. In a certain sense, no. The objective time of scientific discovery, the time of the ancestral and what I call the descendental, is something which science asserts exists independent of us, and which it seems as if it is absurd to deny this. To say that, for instance, that universal time only begins when humans begin means also, in Kantian terms, that universal space also begins only when humans begin. And yet we know that time and space began, if we can use that language, 13.5 billion years ago. It's something called the Big Bang. Long, long, long before our temporality began. I use the word time. I should perhaps use the word temporality to describe the subjective passage or the subjective correlationist passage of time within the world, which is how we are in the world as sentient beings. That kind of temporality is part of what Meillassoux would call the correlation. and does not seem to subsist outside of us, as it were, independent of us. Um, so I hope that that goes some way to clarifying your question. Now, what the relationship between the two is, that's a good question. Neuroscientists keep telling us, "Oh, we found the answer to all that," but they have not. So, um, let's see. Next question.
Yeah, the next one was mine. It was just an observation. As you describe things, it seems that I never thought about the end. I mean, in the sense that,
Right.
yeah, we move the origin of ourselves, of our creation from God to the human, but also our end now. It's uh, uh, as you were describing in Middle Age, we were thinking in Middle Ages, we were thinking that, okay, the end would come near because of the end of God that is in wrath with us and so on. Now all seems to start and end from the end of humans.
I think a
Uh,
lot has, your question that your assertion that our species has moved from beginning to end via technology. And let me
via
add
technology.
science. Of course, as people lots of people who know all of this area of scholarship better than I do, our conceptions of natural science and technology change quite radically from, you know, um, the first discoveries of it in China, and mostly in Far Eastern civilizations, and in India, and then later in Europe. These sciences were considered as ways of understanding the world, but not so much as changing it, except in certain very limited ways. Geography could teach you surveying and help you with architecture. It could teach, celestial navigation could help you guide your ships across the ocean without having to hug the coasts, things like that. But the idea that technology would and science would enable you to understand the natural world all the way down and to control it all the way down and all the way up as a result is a distinctly new approach to natural science and technology, one that doesn't depend upon a divine dispensation of any kind. It's something that we do ourselves. Um, and it's that we doing it ourselves aspect, which is what distinguishes modern science and technology from ancient and medieval science and technology, or even the technology of ancient South Asia or the Far East, I would argue. Again, there's people who know those areas much better than I do, but from what I've read, I don't see any evidence in my studies of those areas to tell me otherwise. So the technological control aspect is something that is critical, but it's something that's central to Adler's thinking, right? Because this technological control in the modern period puts us in the position of being able to not just affect the future, because I thought of this as a possible objection to my argument. Of course, there is a moral direction to temporality. We can't affect the past, but we can affect the future. And we should affect the future for the good. And I thought, but the way we can affect the future, according to Anders, is far different than most progress-based thinkers and ethical thinkers think about the future, right? Um, you won't find, I don't think that anywhere in John Rawls talks about the nuclear apocalypse. I don't think anywhere in contemporary, you know, or there may be a few places where some utilitarians talk about it, but not many. And the idea that the end would be definitive. I mean, one of the things that strikes me about popular representations of the end times, like movies like The Day After or the British movie Threads or something like that, is that they first of all, they sentimentalize it. They make it all about certain characters and their particular stories. But B, they don't really depict what would actually happen, which is, and you can't. I mean, how can you simply stop a movie like like the end of the last episode of The Sopranos, right in the middle of what's happening. But that's what would happen, right? Famously, in the last episode of The Sopranos, Tony Soprano gets whacked. But you don't see the whack taking place, right? What you see is Tony sitting in a bar. You see his assassin go into the washroom. You see the guy come out from the washroom. You hear the ringing of the door as Tony's daughter's about to come in, and then the frame goes black. Dead silence. How could you end a movie like that? But that's what the end of time would, as it were, be like. You can't, but it wouldn't, because even in The Sopranos, you've got this space of time of a black frame and silence. Meanwhile, back behind you, behind, the television in your living room, somebody's making popcorn. That's not the end of the world. So, anyway.
Thank you for bringing some lightness here and there. We need it. So,
Jacob, book.
next, Jennifer
Was
Egan was proposing the book A Nuclear War from Jacobson's.
yes, it is. It's extremely well researched and written. She's interviewed just over a period of over 10 years, just dozens and dozens of people, retired nuclear experts, military people, people willing to go on the record. Very, very few anonymous sources in this book. This is a real, real work of first-rate journalism, and it's absolutely terrifying. I can't. Anyway, it's one of those books I take out rarely. I had to do it for preparing for this presentation, so
I will not read it then.
um,
Your face, not.
Mohammed, have you been able to turn off can Susie, can you turn off his muting? You might be able to turn off his muting
Yeah,
yourself.
I can ask him, but no more than that.
Okay.
We have a question from Chris,
Christopher,
and then
yes.
another from
Sure.
Jen.
Let me address Christopher's. I'm wondering whether we need to be terrified by the end of humanity. A post-human reality is likely in the grand scheme of things, whether it happens due to nuclear war, the dying sun, etc. For me, I can rightly be terrified by the prospect of experiencing the ending or fear of suffering of others, but this seems to me different from fearing the actual end of it all. When I'm gone, it is for me as if everything is gone. That doesn't need to be terrifying since it is just the way it is. Where do I sit in your thinking? I think that's a very good point, and I think that's one of the problems that Anders points out in The Obsolescence about our reaction to the nuclear threat. We analogize our own death with the death of civilization, with the death of the entire human race, with the death of the bioecosphere, which would be produced by a full-on nuclear exchange. That analogy does not work. I can analogize my death with the death of 5, 10, 100 people, which is why the trolley problem in utilitarian ethics is so famous. But I cannot construct a trolley problem on one track of which lies the entirety of civilization, history, the future generations, and the entire biosphere. And yet we have built that trolley. So the analogy fails, and we console ourselves in a way. We console ourselves by thinking, oh, well, it will be as if, once I'm dead, I won't be around. So, as the old classical saying goes, you need not fear death because prior to death, I am, and after death, death is. But this does not apply to the annihilation of the entirety of civilization. So, and again, because one of the things that we're taught not to worry about things which aren't in our control. Now, Anders points out in The Obsolescence that this isn't just some sort of pop psychological neo-stoic mantra that we can teach ourselves. Oh, well, I shouldn't worry about things that aren't in my control, only to things that are in my control. Because we are in control of the end of the world. Maybe not myself directly, but through pressure upon political figures, through constant activism and pressure, we can disarm the world. It looks impossible. It's not. We built it. We can unbuild it. It's not logically or materially impossible. And we should do it because the collapse of civilization, not the collapse, the utter obliteration, the annihilation, the blasting of civilization, all human life, everything is a tragedy too immense to conceive. I've done a lot, been fortunate enough to travel a lot in my world. I've seen Rome, Paris, London, Bucharest, Sydney, Melbourne, all over the United States, all over Canada, Japan. I've seen these places. The idea that they would be annihilated is, it's simply too much. Paris, gone. Rome, gone. Florence, gone in an instant. It's simply too much. I can't bear it. So I think Anders would urge you that while your own death is concerned, the death of civilization is even greater. Then, so I'll let it stand at that, and I'll turn to the last question by Jan. Do you think we got complacent with the idea of weapons of mass destruction and the presumption of our rationality, saving us from ourselves? Yes. Very much so. We have become complacent. But notice, the complacency is not just a fault of us. It is also due to the fact that the powers that be want us to be complacent. They want us not to pay attention. They want us not to talk about it. They want us to be passive, to leave it up to them, to leave it up to the experts, right? This is something that disarmament advocates have often come up against. They will talk to these experts, and they will say, leave it up to us, the experts. Leave it up to us, the military. I assure you, the military is not the source of wisdom. One of the scenarios that I'll leave it at this, that Jacobs talks about in her book, is a famous meeting back in the 1950s at Offutt Air Force Base in the United States, where one of the chiefs of staff, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, laid out the first single integrated operational plan for the nuclear bombardment of Russia, which was horrific. Tens of thousands, thousands of megatons of nuclear warheads on cities, on military emplacements, on missile sites, et cetera, et cetera. Big transparent overlays for all of it. At the end of it, the chairman asked if anybody dissented. Only one person dissented. The chief of staff of the Marine Corps, who said that this was inhuman, that this was un-American, that this was that no sane person could advocate this policy. And he was overruled. But we can overrule these people if we push hard enough. Thanks.
Thank you. We have Mohammed's question.
Okay.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Thank you, Mohammed.
Okay, thank you. Firstly, thank you very much for the lecture, and I also and yes, hello from Pakistan. I'm speaking from Pakistan.
Sure.
And at the despite the pessimistic and very let's say grim talk, you also at the end mentioned that it's not impossible. Like Nelson Mandela has had this quote that every world's greatest task seems impossible until it is done. So I
Yes.
think that is very much that's a message of hope. I agree with that. And on the other hand, I mean, we talk about the loss of civilization, culture, and of course human lives. And even we can connect it with antinatalism. Like some people argue that
Yes.
we should not procreate because because humans are a cause of loss of so many species. But in case of nuclear war, everything will be destroyed, not only us, all the there are mega diverse countries, home to all sorts of plants, animals, and stuff like that. And speaking of the situation, I was just came across a few days ago that now even Canada is Canadian military is studying Taliban tactics to to avoid a possible US invasion of them. So, because Taliban exploited the intelligence gap with the US military, and, they succeeded that. Um, and yes, last point, which I also want an input on, which I think relates to the neuroscientists, because there was I think he's a neuroscientist at Oxford. He's perhaps from the Middle East. So he argues that when people they concentrate too much power, their brain acts like cocaine addicts. So, means their judgment gets poor, and they don't listen to anybody, and they only think of themselves in the very narrow domain.
Yes. Thank you very much, Mohammed. You've made a number of interesting points. Let me respond to them in reverse order. First, about people with too much power. It would suggest, if you haven't read it already, a book by Gary Wills, Garry Wills, Wills, American historian, called Bomb Power,
Right.
in which he shows how the United States government and its leaders became increasingly devoted to the power of the executive, and particularly the power of the president, after the exclusive ability to use nuclear weapons was vested in the person of the president. And the fact that power is now vested in someone like Trump is something that keeps me up at night.
Very
Um,
true.
the issue of Canada and its military. One of the things I'm taking the oath of Canadian citizenship tomorrow, by the way.
Oh,
One of the
that's
things,
great.
thank
And I
you.
want to mention actually my cousin and my best friend, he's a tenure track professor at University of Alberta.
Ah,
And few days ago, he met the Canadian Army chief because he's a
oh,
mechanical engineer and he deals
oh, I
with,
see. Yes, yes, yes. Well, of course, although Canada has allowed nuclear weapons from time to time to enter its boundaries because of various NATO and various US, it has generally, so far as I'm aware, I may be wrong, and there may be secrets I don't know. Thank you very much for posting the bomb power thing. Um, as far as I know, it has not allowed nuclear weapons to be stationed on its soil. And
Wow.
famously, one of the former prime ministers, John Diefenbaker, was arguably financed out of power by American interests because he refused this. Now, and Canada does not have control of any nuclear weapons at all. In fact, in the Air and Space Museum, there's a little display of a nuclear missile, which was meant to mount nuclear weapons, and it says the nuclear warhead has, needless to say, not been included in this exhibit. Uh, uh, in case you're worried. But uh, originally, we're talking about India and Pakistan, of course, both have nuclear
Yep.
weapons.
Yep.
And
Yes.
studies have recently been published to show that even if only India and Pakistan engaged in a limited nuclear war, the impact of fallout and of nuclear winter from that limited nuclear war would be enough to kill billions of human beings. So if you added to that, not just with Islamabad and Karachi and New Delhi and Mumbai be annihilated, but billions of human beings besides would be annihilated. But a full-on nuclear exchange would just wipe everything out. So we're in a very bad way, and I hear all of your concerns. I don't know that I can respond completely to all of them, but I think that for me the key issue, the first and most critical step, is to take the finger off of the hair trigger of nuclear deterrence, nuclear weaponry, which exists presently.
Yep. Very much so. And I think Pakistan has also developed small tactical nuclear weapons,
No, that's crossing a threshold. Once a nuclear weapon has been deployed and used, whether it's small and tactical or large and strategic, all bets are off. And everyone in Jacobson's book says that. Once a nuclear weapon's been used, then you have to retaliate. Then you have to
Yes, it's
retaliate.
an, vicious
Then
cycle.
It's a chain reaction. It's Chadwick's, it's Leo Szilard's crossing the street chain reaction.
And I just want to share one personal thing that I was in Melbourne for a year and
Mhm.
I lived with a family. I'm talking 10 years ago when I was 18 years old, less than 18 years old. So my host family, the uncle, he was an Australian and his wife was an Indian. So, we three agreed that, this division of India into Pakistan, India, and Bangladesh should not have happened. Like it should have stayed in the United India, and it would have saved lots of lives because on the both sides there were good people, but it was such a tragedy. Like it was a Holocaust in the South Asia.
It was, and as Anders points out in his book, nuclear weapons abolish national boundaries anyway. National boundaries don't mean anything in this time of the end because blast radii and fallout clouds know no national boundaries. It's absurd to maintain national boundaries. You know, we think of atomic weapons as belonging to a political context. No, politics belongs to an atomic context.
Very good comment. Thank you so much. It was a
Welcome.
pleasure.
Pleasure.
There's a comment from Chris. A peculiar scene, another super sad peculiar scene from a movie.
The dead, yes.
Uh,
Right. Yeah, that's right. It would be everything would be overrun by zombies. Or there would be no one, the documents might survive, but there'd be no one to read them. There'd be no one to read them. Exactly
Yeah,
as you say.
one thing would be, I think there was, I'm forgetting the name of that person. Like, there was one moment when there was a Cold War that one captain or colonel on the
Yes,
USSR side,
yes.
he perceived that maybe it's an error and, US not striked USSR, so he decided against it. But he
He,
could have pressed the nuclear button.
he's the one we know about. There have been several incidents where and there are still occasional alerts which activate missile systems. Um, on average, one or two times a year. That's got to stop. We can't have systems that are launch on warning, hair trigger systems, which leave someone like the president. Say the president of the United States has about 6 minutes to decide whether they will launch a retaliatory strike. A Soviet submarine parked about 600 kilometers off of the east coast of the United States. If it launches a flat trajectory submarine launched ballistic missile at Washington, that missile's flight time is about 6.5 minutes before impact. So the president has about 6.5 minutes to make a decision. He or she will not survive because there's not enough time to get out of Washington. They will be killed in the first strike. They have 6.5 minutes to decide whether there will be a retaliatory strike. Famously, Mikhail Gorbachev was interviewed a number of years ago, and he was asked this question. He said, if the United States, God forbid, had ever launched an unprovoked first strike on the Soviet Union, would you have retaliated? And Gorbachev says, no, I would not have, because to retaliate would have meant the end of the human race and the extinction of everything. And the reaction to his announcement was fury by the Russian military establishment because he had weakened the deterrence. This is how much mind virus of nuclear weapons has infected us. It's going to take a lot of work to deprogram ourselves. Anders points out that deterrence is a moral crime. because basically what you're doing is you're saying that if you launch on me, I'll launch on you. So I am holding the entire world hostage. I threaten to turn the entire world into a death camp just to prevent you from doing something. That's totalitarianism. That's you know, we have turned the entire world into an extermination camp from which there is no escape. That's what deterrence policy has done.
And there is one physicist in Pakistan, Pervez Hoodbhai. He actually did his PhD in physics from MIT, and he met people who were in the Manhattan Project.
Yes.
So, but he has been lifelong, like he's in 70s, I think, but he's still very active, and he has a space in Islamabad as well, called the Black Hole, and he
Hmm.
still keeps advocating, against nuclear weapons and for
What is
disarmament.
what is his name again, please?
Pervez Hoodbhoy,
How do you spell it?
Hopervez. That's Pervez, and Hoodbhoy is Hoodbhoy.
Pervez. Boy, I will look him
Yep.
up.
And actually, there was only one Nobel laureate physicist, Abdus Salam. So he has
Yes,
interviews with him as well. So
right.
he was kind of his student as well. Um,
Are there other questions?
No, one question would be that, how in this, like, we are brainwashed into, this nuclear deterrence and mutual assured destruction and stuff like that. So, how, like, in our culture, global culture, and among these countries, especially the nuclear countries, the nine countries that have nuclear weapons, so, how it will be, there would be a way out of it.
Well, a lot of it has to do with overcoming what he calls atomische Blindheit, that is to say, obliviousness to the nuclear threat. We have tamped it down below the level of consciousness, as that quote from Richard Feynman shows. Okay, um, we've had the bombs now for 70 or 80 years. We haven't used them except for those two at the beginning. We won't use them. And that's not true.
Yep, and we have had this argument that now big wars are not happening since World War II,
Right.
but since 2022 we are seeing that it has returned. And one last point is that now with the deployment and application of AI, like I think there was one documentary by The Verge
Yeah.
that Israel was using AI systems to, target. So it takes like a nine, like let's say it's killing 100 people. So it captures that, okay, if it's 10 people are just killed by, by chance, they don't deserve it, but there is that error, so it can happen. Now let's say if someone applies AI on that nuclear,
There has been some talk about that, but I also understand from my contacts who are in the military that the military is very, very, very skeptical about letting AI
that's
anywhere near nuclear command and control, which
that
to me is the beginning of some kind of sanity. Um,
absolutely.
it the idea that you could let Skynet or whatever you know take over nuclear weapons is simply no. I mean, this is a system that if you ask it to give you to look up a number of articles on the internet, will simply hallucinate several of them. I don't want an AI hallucinating an enemy threat and launching missiles on its own initiative. No, no.
Yeah. Right. Thank you so much. Wishing
Susie,
you a long and healthy life, and hopefully,
thank you.
we see
Yes,
better days.
yes, I agree with you completely. Susie, where are we in our schedule?
Yeah, we are keeping you longer than I anticipated, but it was such a pleasure to have a place where to vent our fears and be
Yeah,
informed because
yeah.
I,
Frighten thy neighbor as thyself. Get scared.
exactly.
Frighten other people.
Yeah,
We
I
have to stop
don't
this.
know
It
about
simply has to stop. It simply has to stop.
Yeah, so it could be an interesting reading to add to my classes for the next semester. Thank you
Yeah,
so
the list of theses, the 22 theses is really, it's a
Mhm.
very impactful short text and provides a lot of basis for discussion. Yeah.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure to have you. Thanks.
Very
And
welcome.
thanks everyone
And
for making
bye
this.
to everyone on Zoom and everyone on the YouTube channel too.
Yeah. Well,
Disarm now.